Hello, this is Anna Malia from Northeast Animal Rights. Today we're doing another one of our Saturday Spotlight interviews, and we are delighted to have Alex Lockwood, who is an author and activist, join us today to talk to us. So welcome, Alex, and thank you very much for joining us.
Hello, great to be here. Thank you, Anna.
So if you're okay, we'll go straight into the questions. So the first one is, can you tell us a little bit about your vegan journey so far, please?
Sure. I went vegetarian first when I was about 15, and then again when I was 17, and that was in response to an article about whaling, actually. So whales and marine mammals have always been really important to me. But then, drifted through sort of like eating meat and everything, like grew up that way till I was about in my sort of late 20s, early 30s, and then decided that I wanted to be more aligned with my values. And then for me, I think that the rise of social media, particularly Facebook, actually, in the time of 2005, was a massive window into things that I didn't know were going on. I didn't know what factory farming was. I didn't know, how animals were treated. Even though at that point I was vegetarian, I wasn't really thinking deeply about the subject. It was like, oh, personal choice. I don't want to eat meat. That's fine. But I didn't think any more about it. And it was two things, I think. It was one, adopting a companion animal from a shelter, and the rise of social media started to open your eyes to things. And then once, because those values were, I think, in me anyway, as soon as I was able to see things and hear things that I didn't know about, the window was open, and then it had to keep opening. So I then became very interested in those issues, particularly around the Save movement. Actually, it was a lot of the videos of bearing witness that sort of opened my eyes to what was going on with animal agriculture. And at that point, then I decided, as well as having a companion animal in the house, that I started really learning about what veganism was and actions to take part in that. So I was probably vegan for about 5 or 6 years before I then became active. Mm-hmm. But then that seemed obviously the right trajectory to go on. And it was actually whales again, marine mammals, that got me into that. So I started volunteering with Orca, marine mammal charity up here in the Northeast, who basically take kids out on the ferries to whale watch and dolphin watch. And I then did some creative writing classes with them to help them reflect upon the experience. And it was by doing that got me a Winston Churchill Fellowship to go to America to do similar stuff over there, where I then went on this grand tour and met huge amounts of animal rights activists and DXE and the Save movement and Farm Sanctuary. And so from that moment, that was 2014, I was like, oh yeah, people are really here trying to make the world a better place for all beings. And that really was my start of the vegan activist moment of my life.
Yeah. So how do you feel as if the animal rights movement has progressed in recent years? Because it's kind of, I mean, you talked about social media being a big sort of part of what we do, but we use it as a tool. I mean, I hate social media with a passion, but it's a very, very useful tool for animal activism. Do you feel as if it's slowed down? Do you feel as if we've stopped making progress, or has it slowed in certain areas, or we're missing opportunities? I mean, things like obviously the pandemic, we kind of thought was a massive opportunity to educate people. So how do you feel about the animal rights movement in general?
I'm really sorry, Anna, my phone's going off and I forgot to turn it off. So I'm going to have to go and turn it off.
Sorry, I'll just pause this, don't worry.
Yeah, otherwise it will.
Okay.
Yeah, my sense is, I mean, I didn't know a huge amount about the history of the animal rights movement, but I mean, in a way it's been going for at least 200 years in its current form, through different morphologies and different sort of views and perspectives. And talking to other activists who are alive and around now, like there was in a way, not a golden age, but there was a lot of activism in the 70s and 80s, particularly around anti-vivisection, hunt saboteuring, and the veganism at a very small level. But obviously the Vegan Society is 70 years old. And you go back to next year is a seminal moment. 1822 is the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of the Martins Act, which is the first piece of animal welfare legislation in the world. So it goes in these peaks and troughs. And we've got to remember, in a way, that the forces against animal rights and animal justice are probably the biggest forces in the world. because capitalism is built upon animal labor and animal bodies. And I've always thought that talking about what people eat is actually a more taboo subject than talking about sex a lot of the time. So, you know, there used to be that old thing about, you know, if you go to a dinner party, don't talk about sort of sex, politics or religion. And now you have to add food to that, actually, because it's so my sense is that in a way, like, that's quite a good, it's quite a good evidence, actually, that animal rights and animal justice has gained a lot of ground, has gained a lot of traction, and that veganism and plant-based diets and understanding have really proliferated because there is so much resistance to them, so much conscious awareness resistance as well. One of the things that I get told a lot by the generation slightly above me, the people who were active in the 70s and 80s, is that the people now think that they're doing something new when actually it's all been done before. And I think an understanding of the history of the movement and what has been tried and what was successful and what wasn't successful is really important. But I think absolutely in the last 15, 20 years, there has been a renaissance or a huge movement forward, actually, that you can measure perhaps in terms of like the rise of veganism, the rise of plant-based, the move towards flexitarian diets, the new sort of animal welfare and animal rights laws that are emerging. But there's still so much further to go. And I do think that social media has played a huge role in that, because it has democratized or it's removed a lot of gates that were held up by gatekeepers to awareness and knowledge. So it's got an awful lot to answer for, social media. It's very bad in some ways, but it has been a very effective tool.
So picking up on a couple of things you mentioned there, do you think, I mean, you know, we kind of, you're talking about if you have a dinner party, you wouldn't mention sex, politics or religion. And now obviously food is another one. Do you think it's because people feel as if we're judging their food choices? And how do we sort of deal with that? If you're kind of sitting around a table and there's people there who are, you know, who are curious about your veganism, how would you deal with that on a personal level?
Well, to begin with, people do feel judged because, I mean, my first book, The Pig in Thin Air, like its subject, it's a subheadline is an identification, because it's actually all about identity. It's all about the fact that we are, as human beings, we're composed of a whole bunch of identifications, such as, you know, a bad sleeper, a good brother, I'm a footballer, I'm a writer, I'm a lawyer, I'm a mother, you know, whatever it might be. And we're very attached to those because we are social beings. So we like to know where we are in relation to others within our society. And food then is a large part of that. And a lot of us grow up with strong attachments, not only to food, but to the social bonds that food gives. So your grandmother's favorite pie, you know, going out for a drink with someone, and, you know, like, you know, not rejecting the offer of food, because to do that is an incredibly rude thing within a social network. So I do think it's really, it's actually one of the one of the foundational aspects of identification, because actually because we do it so much. You know, the point is we eat far more probably than we have sex or talk about politics or talk about or go to church. You know, so we're doing it all day, every day. And those bonds are made up around that. So actually to challenge that, to unpick people's identifications with the way that they live and the way that they fit within their social groups is a massive threat to individual egos and communities. So that's what we're up against when we talk about sort of food and switching to plant-based diets and veganism. It's like, because the status quo, the four N's, what's natural, normal, necessary and nice, has always been, in this culture at least, sort of eating animal products, you know. How do I deal with that on a personal level? I mean, you go through phases, don't you? Sometimes, you know, I went through a lot of times where I was like, I don't want to go to my friend's barbecue. I don't want to sit down with my family at Christmas, but I do it because I don't want to lose those social connections. Now I've been vegan for like 12, 13 years. Everyone knows I'm vegan, and people, you know, some people are better responding to that. Other people are not responding to that. For me personally, I spent enough of my time in my professional time and enough of my private time in light social situations,
Mhm.
advocating, talking about it, modeling being a vegan, that actually in my private life, it's not where I tackle it. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm not going to tackle my uncle who's got
Yeah.
IBS.
Yeah.
He's in his 80s. I'm not
Yeah.
going to challenge him over eating meat at his dinner. It's just not
Yeah.
worth it, you know,
Yeah.
because actually I, I do feel that I'm giving more than I'm taking in those situations, you know.
Yeah.
So, and being a model is probably the most important thing you can do in
Yeah.
your close social networks.
Mhm.
Rather than be an advocate, be a model, because actually modeling, particularly for men, actually is a
Mm.
way that is that we learn to accept what might be different from the status quo.
Mhm. So, and I know obviously you are also a lecturer as well, and one of our members was taught by you in one of in a class, and she said that she was at the time she was doing you were doing some sort of a magazine article, sort of like showing people how to present magazine articles, and you used an example of a vegan magazine. So
Mm.
straight away she knew at that point you were vegan. So it's kind of I see what you're saying in terms of you are in your not your private life, but basically every other aspect of your life, you're advocating for animals and veganism.
Yeah, as much as you can. You can be a bit sneaky sometimes like that, which is good. But also, work is great now. I mean, an example being that for a couple of years I was on at our university catering to improve, and wasn't really getting anywhere. But the minute I quoted the 2012 workplace legislation,
Mm,
and they said they had a legal requirement to respect this,
yeah,
I got a phone call half an hour later from the director. Do you know
yeah,
what I mean? So
yeah,
there's always things you can do in your workplace, in your sort of public social life. One of the greatest successes I think I've had is actually at my running club. I've been a member of a
yeah,
running club for 10 years,
yeah,
probably the only vegan when I started. And
mm,
through modeling and talking and having conversations, not by preaching, just by
yeah,
saying, this is what I do, this is how I do it.
yeah,
And it's not all down to me at all, obviously, but people are out there thinking, oh, is that better for health? Is that better for running recovery?
yeah,
And then someone is there modeling it.
mm,
Then they go, oh, maybe I'll try that. Maybe it's acceptable. And actually, I think like almost like 10% of the running club is like veggie or vegan now. You know,
yeah,
out of 500 or 600 people, and it's
yeah.
like
That's yeah.
modeling it in that way. I think is really, really important.
Yeah. I think it is important to be, like you said, I mean, people, when they talk about veganism, they talk about extreme, preachy, judgmental. So it's very important to be the opposite of that, really, to be accepting and understanding and educational, because otherwise you just turn people off.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, it's standard social practice is that out movements or out groups are labelled in ways
yeah.
to bolster the in group, the status quo, and it doesn't
Mhm,
matter who you are, whether you're
mhm,
immigrants or vegans or
mhm.
LGBTQ,
Yeah.
whatever it is, and it does mean that you are fighting two battles there.
Mm,
You're fighting with double
yeah.
you need double the energy.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean it doesn't mean you have to repress your emotions or
Mm,
your actions,
yeah.
but it does mean that you're it's wise to remember that you're actually fighting two battles: the individual and the status quo, which they're protecting.
Yeah.
And it's like, if you want to be strategic and actually change things, it's like, what is the best strategy to do that?
Mm.
you know yeah.
And I suppose the strategy is different for different people as well, because they're at different stages of their journey. They could be at the very start where they're totally against it. There could be, this conversation you're having with them could be the final instigator of them making that change.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of the time you don't know. So
Yeah.
as long as you're being sort of relatively conscious and aware of what you're doing,
Mm,
um, and not and being authentic to yourself, then it's
mm,
okay. I mean, one I do have a bugbear. One bugbear is when activists who get really angry and who use things like shame or blame, and
mm,
then excuse their
mm.
actions because they were passionate.
Yeah.
They lost. I'm just a passionate activist. I'm like, I'm a passionate activist.
Yeah.
Like I dedicate my life to this, but I still act strategically, and I maintain and I manage what I do in situations to have the best effect.
Mhm,
Not every time, I do sometimes lose my temper as well.
mm,
But it's like, you can be passionate without being angry or aggressive.
mhm,
I think it's really important to know,
mm.
because it's if like I'm not doing it here to vent my feelings. I'm doing it here to change
Yeah.
the world for animal justice. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're a very busy man. I mean, we talked before we came on air that about loads of different things that you're doing. So how do you manage to fit in your day job with all your activism, and how do you manage your own well-being? Because I know obviously at some point you came off Facebook because of all the sort of the problems surrounding Facebook.
Yeah. Well, I made a decision about 5 years ago to go part-time. So I manage my, and I'm lucky, I'm in a very privileged position that I get well paid for my job. I'm also lucky that the research that I want to do and writing that I do does overlap with my job. So if I choose to explore and research vegan life practice and writing around that subject, then I can do that for my job as well. So, whatever I get to read for my job is valuable for this. So I'm in a very lucky position that way. But it was a question of balance, going to part-time so that I could do other activism and do other work. So, I mean, I don't think I'm the best at managing work-life balance, actually. I think I overwork. What I have done is try to institute, I never work on Sundays, so I do have a day off, and I do try to have more time off. And I've really only just got, I've been in and out of meditation for like a decade, but now just got back into it, which I do find really important, and a lot of exercise, and eating well. So, I did a lot of the press work and narrative for Animal Rebellion 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we were incredibly successful, I think, for a lot of reasons. But my goodness, I was burnt out. And the majority of us at the beginning of the rebellion, those of us in the core team were burnt out at the beginning of it because of the organization to get there. Yeah. And actually, I think still a year later, some people I know were still burnt out from that action. It's really, really hard to maintain sort of like well-being. I think I'm lucky enough in that I've got sort of a core sense of some boundaries, not others, but I think being well bounded in that sense around what you do, and being well connected into other people who can provide support is really important.
Yeah. So if we talk about your books now, I mean, I'm currently reading The Pig in Thin Air. So what's the motivation behind them? And obviously they cover very different topics.
Yeah. The Pig in Thin Air, the motivation for that was that I had been on this fellowship in America where I'd gone and done this journey. It's in a way a crash course in animal activism from the point of view of a new person engaging with activism. And I thought it would be useful actually to write something that wasn't from someone who'd been in it for 25 years and this is how you do it, but from the point of view of someone finding their feet, someone finding their place on the front line, as it were. And I am a writer, and I've always written, and I hoped then that to turn what was my story into something that'd be useful for other people. And I found it very gratifying that the people who really enjoyed the book, I think, were not so much the people who've been activists for 20, 30 years, but the people who were actually not even activists a lot of the time, because people who read the book felt that they were going to get lectured to, you must be vegan for this, and look at what we do, isn't it horrible? And actually it was just much more of a journey. And again, it was about, what I was trying to do was model a journey for people, so that people would felt that they could go on a journey. And the new book that I've been working on that isn't published yet, but I'm hoping to get it picked up, published soon, is about in a way similar, but not even for vegans and activists. It's actually for flexitarians and vegan curious people, because actually it's a bigger audience. About how we sit down at the table together and discuss what the food system needs to be and what our social justice system needs to be in the future, if we're going to have any future at all, under the shadow of climate change, under the shadow of animal agriculture destruction. And again, the motivation for that is the model is a journey, like what I want to model the journey, and the book is a journey again through the food system, and it's modeling for people. You want to know about this stuff, you care about this stuff, you're a bit busy, you think you're doing the right thing, like what's your journey? This is my journey, could you come along with it, and will it change your mind? And in a way, writing novels is the same. Writing novels, like so, my second book about the Chernobyl disaster. The motivation was is that I actually came to animal activism and veganism and animal rights through environmental issues. That's what I sort of studied and wrote about at university. That's what I did for 5 or 6 years in the charitable sector. And so I came to it through climate change and environment issues. And actually, coming up to the 30th anniversary of Chernobyl, I didn't know anything about it. And read a wonderful book called Chernobyl Prayer by Svetlana Alexievich, for which she won the Nobel Prize for Literature. And it's an incredible tale of that disaster. And it stimulated in me a desire to know more about it. And again, write a story, talk about a journey, write the journey of people who'd experienced it. For me, that's really valuable, because the work I do now, or the work I want to do and I'm starting to do, is about the importance of the narratives and the stories that we tell that will convince people to change their lifestyle. Internally, they decide that they want to change because they are hearing different stories. So what are the best stories for them to hear at different parts of their journey? What's the different language? What's the better language to use? Should we use terms like justice at all? Because actually the movable middle of people who want to be a bit better but don't spend much of their time thinking about it, for them the idea of justice immediately makes them think of like the far left, social justice causes, and actually they're uncomfortable with that. So the idea of fairness actually lands with them much more comfortably. It goes with the grain of what they're thinking. It doesn't get their defenses up. So if we start talking to them about fairer food systems rather than just food systems, or fairer conditions for animals rather than animal rights or animal justice, actually it might land in their heads a bit more easily, and it might shift them to move a bit more. So that's why storytelling is so important. So in a way, everything I write is practicing storytelling so that we can get the best stories to change the world.
Now, I know you're very well travelled. So what do you notice about attitudes to veganism around the world and animal rights and the environment? And do you think one country has a better understanding of what we should all be doing, or kind of does some places sort of fare better in certain aspects of it and not so good in other areas?
Yeah, I mean, it feels like I haven't travelled for ever now. I've been very lucky to do a lot of travelling, go to a lot of places. I've spent a lot of time in America and Canada, and I've been to very, very lucky to have been to a lot of places. I think America is, the United States and Canada are have more developed animal rights, animal justice communities in ways that are responsive to their cultures and environments, because actually they're probably much more openly brutal to animals than in the UK, for example, or in places in Europe. Although actually you go to Spain or Mexico, or the relationship with animals there is quite brutal. I think what happens is the animal justice communities in each country responds to the culture on the ground, and responds then in different ways. And I think the capacity or the extent to which they expand or create is down to those cultural factors. In small places like the Iceland, with small populations, it's incredibly hard, or the Faroe Islands, it's incredibly hard to motivate animal justice or organizations or conversations when they are up against such tight social networks. Whereas in the UK, actually, we are a bit more, our social networks are a bit looser. But even culturally across regions like the Northeast or the Southwest, there are different relations to how activism works. So I think that, to answer your question more pointedly, places like Germany, Israel, Canada, Australia have all got incredible stories to tell about what's going on there, and we can probably learn lessons from all of them. But then you would have to adapt those lessons into the cultural context of what works. And you see that in language and narrative as well. Do you know what I mean? Language that works in some places doesn't work in others, for many reasons. So I think there are lessons to learn, and I think there would be one of the best things we could do is have like a rolling, globally rotating sort of exchange program for
Yeah.
activists,
Yeah.
so they could go and learn from each other.
Mhm.
And actually the save, and that's why actually global movements have been really good, like the Save movement,
Mhm.
or AV, or
Yeah.
DXE, or organizations like that are grassroots global movements. And I think the Save movement particularly um,
Mhm.
have learned a lot from each other across the globe,
Mhm.
and developed different ways of doing things with a core
Mhm.
love-based,
Yeah.
compassion-based attitude to changing the world for animals at its core. Yeah.
Mhm. I was talking to Salo Shayo a couple of weeks ago, and he's a fashion designer and an activist based in Mexico. And he was saying just what you've just said there, which is, particularly the area he comes from. He said it's a very poor area, so they kind of see animal rights and activism as something which is absolutely crazy because they can't afford the food generally, so it's kind of so they're kind of like worrying about where the next meal's going to come from, and he's sort of trying to get them to spend a bit more time and money, having, sort of looking for vegan foods and plant-based alternatives. So I suppose, I mean, I know I've heard that Germany is really, really good, but I also think that in terms of, you have your big sort of your big issues in countries like Japan, but equally you have your big animal rights activists over there. I think the harder the issue is, the braver the activists tend to be as well, like Taji in Japan and in China. A lot of things going on there, but the progress has been made because there are some very brave activists there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And particularly, culture is changing in many places, and I think it's really important to say actually that, I am. I mean, I am an ethical vegan abolitionist. I don't want animals in any way exploited. Um, but I've been in situations where, like, so for the west coast of America, the Pacific Northwest, I'm not there to stop the indigenous Native American tribal peoples from hunting whales. I don't want them to do it, and I don't think they should do it. But that is not the battle that I think we should be fighting. And actually, same with like sub-Saharan Africa and issues of poverty around the world, or even poverty in the UK. We are not here to shame people or blame them, or even um, change cultures where those cultures are not yet in place to be able to change it. I mean, what we really want is to change the entire global capitalist system so that we have enough money and we have enough food to feed everyone. It's like there should be no poverty, there should be no hunger. And actually, my argument is, like, a vegan world is actually, a plant-based world is actually more likely to lead to the end of those exploitations and hungers than an animal-based global food system. And if the idea is that I would love to live on a planet where all beings are treated as equal. On the way there, a predominantly plant-based system in the countries who have the ability and power and money, resources to do that, is actually, when you look at the climate picture as well, the only thing that we can do, or the best thing that we can do, to actually alleviate the top 4 or 5 problems in the world, which is deforestation, climate change, hunger, water use, and pollution. Like, the plant-based system is the best answer to all of those things.
Yeah. So I know you're working on this really, really exciting project for the Vegan Society. So are you able to tell us a bit more about that at the moment? What you're doing with that at the moment?
Yeah, tell you about it, and hopefully when this comes out, it'll be published. So it's a report. I've been working on a report which is a synthesis, really, of 50 to 100 other reports and academic works, plus interviews with around 40 experts in food and farming, including animal farmers, so Welsh sheep farmers, dairy farmers, about what we need to get to a plant-based food system in the UK. So what barriers are there to overcome, and what policy do we need to get to a plant-based food system? And some of those barriers are identity, the farming identity, the fact that British people like seeing lambs on the Lake District fields. They are barriers to getting to a plant-based food system, as is a real lack of data around where plant foods can be grown in the UK, because there isn't the investment in it. There's like there's 1% of investment in research into where pulses and grains can be grown compared to investment in research going into developing animal agriculture. So what the report is it's in two parts. It's a policy document about these are the policies we need now to lay the ground for a fully plant-based food system in the future that will continue to need new policies developed. And it's a research report of a synthesis of all of those interviews and all of those reports laying out where we're at now, what the barriers are, what's good about the food system, what needs to change, and why we need to do it. So it really talks about sort of demanding that our government implement a food sustainability bill, because we have an agriculture bill, we have an environment bill, but we don't have a food bill. We don't have food enshrined as a right in legislation. And when you think, well, 4 million children in the UK are going hungry, are in food poverty, you think, well, food must be a right, surely. And that's regardless of whether it's a vegan world food system or not. Food needs to be a right for people. And that isn't to say that food needs to be animal food, you know, like animal protein. And what it means is that when you piece it together with the environmental issue, the ethical issues, the ecological issues, the best way to get to a fair food system for everyone is a plant-based food system. And the evidence is there to say that, to show that. And so this report is about synthesizing all of that, making the case for two specific bits of legislation now, laying the ground for further animal rights legislation in the future, and really identifying the detail of the barriers that are going to stop us getting there.
So you're writing this report now, this huge report. So what are the Vegan Society going to do with that? Are they lobbying government already? Are they going to present it to government? Have they got any kind of sort of like ways into the government to get this to get this looked at as legislation?
Yeah, the idea is that this will be the policy direction for the Vegan Society, which I hope means the policy direction for the vegan movement in the UK. And yes, so it is a policy direction. So the Vegan Society will be saying these are the policies we need. So in Parliament at the moment, there is the all-party parliamentary group for vegetarian and veganism. There is the new Conservative Vegan group of 7 Conservative MPs, which I think is actually really good and useful. And it is opportunity to provide leverage. And I think I can say this because I'm not, I've written this as an external commissioned author for the Vegan Society. What is really important, I think, is that the Vegan Society and vegan policy has a permanent seat at the table when talking about food policy. And we're not just invited in when it's the vegan issue. Do you know what I mean? Like, we need to be there in the same way that the Green Party has developed from a party that talked about environmental issues in the 70s to a party now that has policies in all areas of politics. This is what I think is we're laying the ground for. And that's why actually the report, what's really important in policy is systems thinking. You can't think in silos. You can't think, oh, let's change the food system unless you think about how it impacts on health, economics, environment, for example, or even justice for workers, fair conditions for workers. So this is about getting not just the Vegan Society, but vegans in general, anyone who wants to change the system, thinking in systems terms. So are you as activists on the street ready to talk to people about environment, economy, just work conditions, health? Because actually those questions will come at you, will come at us. And actually, if we have answers to those, because we see where the food system fits into our overall social system, we see where animals fit in that overall social system, then we can actually help change that system more effectively. And so that's what I think this report is about. And so, it will be, governments will be lobbied, other food organizations will be lobbied. And what it does, I think, is really stake out the ground that vegans are credible policy people. We know that if we want to change the food system, we need to be talking about health. We need to be talking about the economy and just work. And we need to be talking about the environment.
So how hard was it to get farmers actually to engage with this report or this study you're doing?
Not really that hard, because actually many farmers know change is coming. Many farmers want to have their voices heard.
Mm-hmm.
Many farmers feel the same as many of us do. Like we're not going to get anywhere by shouting at people. We're going to get further.
Mm-hmm.
One farmer I spoke to, a guy called Tim, his son is vegan. He's a Welsh sheep farmer, and his son is vegan. So these conversations are real in his family.
Mm-hmm.
And so it wasn't actually that hard. Having said that, though, the National Farmers Union represents many big farmers who are businesses. Do you know what I mean? So, and it's not as easy to get to talk to them because actually they're coming at it from very different. Tim, who's a Welsh sheep farmer, farming is his identity and it's in his lifestyle. But there's no money in it. Do you know what I mean? They're subsidised up to the hill. And he's living a very stressful, difficult life while he's also doing something that he loves while his son's vegan. These are complex issues for people who are very often decent people. And to be able to sit down and have a conversation with a vegan about these things in a decent, civil way is actually really important to them as important it is to us.
So. I think that's there's a few things there I was just kind of thinking of when you were talking about the National Farmers Union. I think it is really important that we don't have these shouty conversations with farmers. We have civilized education, kind of like sharing of experiences, a bit like in the SAVE movement. Obviously it's a peace-based movement, and you're not going to convince farmers to transition by shouting and screaming at the gates of a slaughterhouse. But Rebecca Knowles, she's the founder of Farmers for Stock-Free Farming up in Scotland, and she was saying that she's now talking to the National Farmers Union, on a quite regular basis because they understand that change is coming. So she's kind of really, really well placed in terms of looking at. She's got really good case studies in terms of how farmers can transition from animal agriculture to plant-based, plant-based farming, or holiday, like tourism. Reforestation, rewilding, that sort of thing. And I was also surprised that she invited me to a webinar a couple of months ago to talk about it was just about food systems really. And there was actually a farmer there, a dairy farmer, and he had said at the outset he was very, very nervous about being in this webinar because he knew we were all activists, all vegans, and he was expecting to be shouted at and lectured, But we were really interested in what he had to say, and he said that it's a very, very stressful job. There's not much money in it. You understood that, obviously, the subsidies were sort of keeping him propped up, and he was actively looking to get out of animal agriculture, and that's because he knew that there was a route, kind of like a route forged for him to come out of it, but also people were prepared to give him help as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is the way that we're going to get to an end of animal agriculture much more quickly, is by providing economic routes out of it, providing civil discourse to illuminate those paths out of it, and recognizing it's also really important to recognize that farmers have been doing what they thought was good, and so then to attack them and the pride that they felt in feeding the country is not going to get us anywhere. It's like we don't have to agree with animal farming or animal agriculture to be able to see strategically what is the best way to bring it to an end. We don't have to act in uncivil ways to bring it to an end. And actually, it will probably reach the end of animal agriculture much more quickly through that sort of civil, strategic way of acting. That doesn't mean we shouldn't still be raising awareness in highly provocative or spicy ways. That's fine. But it's overall that the better strategy is to find ways to work with the grain of those who are in farming to get them into plant-based farming.
So final question for this morning then. So what's next for you then?
I'm doing some work with Seaspiracy at the moment, about sort of developing, and so I'm learning a lot actually about sort of like illegal fishing and overfishing. And I've got this book out. Well, I've got a book proposal out, which is all about sort of like vegan conversations with farmers and like a journey through the food system. So I'm waiting to hear back from any agents or publishers whether they'll find that interesting, and then I'll write that. And anything else? And getting back to fiction, actually, I've started on a new novel, which is actually around some of these themes and issues as well, which I was in, and then I'm having a little break this summer because I definitely, as we were saying beforehand, like I'm getting to feel like I've been on like quite a long, a decade or so long cycle, and need a proper break from everything to reevaluate and then start again. So that's. But if I get a book deal for this Vegan v Pharma book deal, then that's what I'll be working on. So we'll see.
So you might have a break, you might not then.
Yeah, exactly. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, it's been really, really fascinating talking to you today. So thank you very much. I really, really do appreciate it. And obviously I'll I'll put some links onto your books and everything when we put this out, because I'm absolutely, I find them absolutely fantastic to read. So thank you very much for talking to us today. I'm going to sign off now. This is Anna Malia from Northeast Animal Rights, talking to activist and author Alex Lockwood. So good luck from everybody at NIA, and sending you lots of good wishes from everyone who's watching as well.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, and you.